Chinese piano music is 5 black keys. Normal Chinese women's voices are strong and bossy. We American Chinese girls had to whisper to make ourselves American feminine. Apparently, we whispered even more softly than the Americans. Once a year, the teachers referred my sister and me to speech therapy, but our voices would straighten out, unpredictably normal, for the therapists. Some of us gave up, shook our heads, and said nothing, not one word. Some of us could not even shake our heads. At times, shaking my head no is more self-assertion than I can manage. Most of us eventually found some voice, however faltering. We invented an American feminine speaking personality, except for that one girl who could not speak up, even in Chinese school. She was a year older than I and was in my class for 12 years. During all those years, she read aloud but would not talk. Her older sister was usually beside her. Their parents kept the older daughter back to protect the younger one. They were 6 and 7 years old when they began school. Although I had flunked kindergarten, I was the same age as most other students in our class. My parents had probably lied about my age, so I had had a head start and came out even. My younger sister was in the class below me. We were normal ages and normally separated. The parents of the quiet girl, on the other hand, protected both daughters. When it sprinkled, they kept them home from school. The girls did not work for a living the way we did, but in other ways, we were the same. We were similar in sports. We held the bat on our shoulders until we walked to first base. You got a strike only when you actually struck at the ball. Sometimes the pitcher wouldn't bother to throw to us. Automatic walk, the other children would call, sending us on our way. By 4th or 5th grade, though, some of us would try to hit the ball. Easy out, the other kids would say. I hit the ball a couple of times. Baseball was nice in that there was a definite spot to run to after hitting the ball. Basketball confused me because when I caught the ball, I didn't know whom to throw it to. Me, the kids would be yelling. Over here. Suddenly it would occur to me I hadn't memorized which ghosts were on my team and which were on the other. When the kids said automatic walk, the girl who was quieter than I kneeled with one end of the bat in each hand and placed it carefully on the plate. Then she dusted her hands as she walked to first base, where she rubbed her hands softly, fingers spread. She always got tagged out before second base. She would whisper read but not talk. Her whisper was as soft as if she had no muscles. She seemed to be breathing from a distance. I heard no anger or tension. I joined in at lunchtime when the other students, the Chinese too, talked about whether or not she was mute, although obviously she was not if she could read aloud. People told how they had tried their best to be friendly. They said hello, but if she refused to answer, well, they didn't see why they had to say hello anymore. She had no friends of her own, but followed her sister everywhere, although people in her and she herself probably thought I was her friend. I also followed her sister about, who was fairly normal. She was almost 2 years older and read more than anyone else. I hated the younger sister, the quiet one. I hated her when she was the last chosen for her team and I the last chosen for my team. I hated her for her China doll haircut. I hated her at music time for the wheezes that came out of her plastic flute. One afternoon in the 6th grade that year, I was arrogant with talk, not knowing there were going to be high school dances and college seminars to set me back. I and my little sister and the quiet girl and her big sister stayed late after school for some reason. The cement was cooling and the tetherball poles made shadows across the gravel. The hooks at the rope ends were clinking against the poles. We shouldn't have been so late. There was laundry work to do and Chinese school to get to by 5. The last time we had stayed late, my mother had phoned the police and told them we had been kidnapped by bandits. The radio stations broadcast our descriptions. I had to get home before she did that again. But sometimes if you loitered long enough in the schoolyard, the other children would have gone home and you could play with the equipment before the office took it away. We were chasing one another through the playground and in and out of the basement, where the playroom and lavatory were. During air raid drills, it was during the Korean War, which you knew about because every day the front page of the newspaper printed a map of Korea with the top part red and going up and down like a window shade. We curled up in this basement. Now everyone was gone. The playroom was army green and had nothing in it but a long trough with drinking spigots in rows. Pipes across the ceiling led to the drinking fountains and to the toilets in the next room. When someone flushed, you could hear the water and other matter, which the children named, running inside the big pipe above the drinking spigots. There was one playroom for girls next to the girls' lavatory, and one playroom for boys next to the boys' lavatory. The stalls were open, and the toilets had no lids, by which we knew that ghosts had no sense of shame or privacy. Inside the playroom, the light bulbs and cages had already been turned off. Daylight came in X patterns through the caging at the windows. I looked out, and seeing no one in the schoolyard, ran outside to climb the fire escape upside down, hanging on to the metal stairs with fingers and toes. I did a flip off the fire escape and ran across the schoolyard. The day was a great eye, and it was not paying much attention to me now. I could disappear with the sun. I could turn quickly sideways and slip into a different world. It seemed I could run faster at this time, and by evening I would be able to fly. As the afternoon wore on, we could run into the forbidden places, the boys' big yard, the boys' playroom. We could go into the boys' laboratory and look at the urinals. The only time during school hours I had crossed the boys' yard was when a flatbed truck with a giant thing covered with canvas and tied down with ropes had parked across the street. The children had told one another that it was a gorilla in captivity. We couldn't decide whether the sign said Trail of the Gorilla or Trial of the Gorilla. The thing was as big as a house. The teachers couldn't stop us from hysterically rushing to the fence and clinging to the wire mesh. Now I ran across the boys' yard clear to the cyclone fence and thought about the hair that I had seen sticking out of the canvas. It was going to be summer soon, so you could feel that freedom coming on too. I ran back into the girls' yard, and there was the quiet sister all by herself. I ran past her, and she followed me into the girls' lavatory. My footsteps rang hard against cement and tile because of the taps I had nailed into my shoes. Her footsteps were soft, padding after me. There was no one in the lavatory but the two of us. I ran all around the rows of 25 open stalls to make sure of that. No sisters. I think we must have been playing hide-and-go-seek. She was not good at hiding by herself and usually followed her sister. They'd hide in the same place. They must have gotten separated. In this growing twilight, a child could hide and never be found. I stopped abruptly in front of the sinks, and she came running toward me before she could stop herself, so that she almost collided with me. I walked closer. She backed away, puzzlement, then alarm in her eyes. "You're going to talk," I said, my voice steady and normal as it is when talking to the familiar, the weak, and the small. "I am going to make you talk, you sissy girl." She stopped backing away and stood fixed. I looked into her face so I could hate it close up. She wore black bangs and her cheeks were pink and white. She was baby soft. I thought that I could put my thumb on her nose and push it bonelessly in, indent her face. I could poke dimples into her cheeks. I could work her face around like dough. She stood still, and I did not want to look at her face any more. I hated fragility. I walked around her, looked her up and down the way the Mexican and Negro girls did when they fought so tough. I hated her weak neck, the way it did not support her head but let it droop. Her head would fall backward. I stared at the curve of her nape. I wished I was able to see what my own neck looked like from the back and sides. I hoped it did not look like hers. I wanted a stout neck. I grew my hair long to hide it in case it was a flower stem neck. I walked around to the front of her to hate her face some more. I reached up and took the fatty part of her cheek, not dough, but meat, between my thumb and finger, this close, and I saw no pores. "Talk," I said. "Are you going to talk?" Her skin was fleshy, like squid out of what the glassy blades of bones had been pulled. I wanted tough skin, hard brown skin. I had calloused my hands. I had scratched dirt to blacken the nails, which I cut straight across to make stubby fingers. I gave her face a squeeze. "Talk." When I let go, the pink rushed back into my white thumbprint on her skin. I walked around to her side. "Talk!" I shouted into the side of her head. Her straight hair hung the same all these years, no ringlets or braids or permanents. I squeezed her other cheek. "Are you? Huh? Are you going to talk?" She tried to shake her head, but I had hold of her face. She had no muscles to jerk away. Her skin seemed to stretch. I let go in horror. What if it came away in my hand? "No, huh?" I said, rubbing the touch of her off my fingers. "Say no, then," I said. I gave her another pinch and a twist. "Say no." She shook her head, her straight hair turning with her head, not swinging side to side like the pretty girls. She was so neat. Her neatness bothered me. I hated the way she folded the wax paper from her lunch. She did not wad her brown paper bag and her school papers. I hated her clothes, the blue pastel cardigan, the white blouse with the collar that lay flat over the cardigan, the homemade flat cotton skirt she wore when everybody else was wearing flared skirts. I hated pastels. I would wear black always. I squeezed again, harder, even though her cheek had a weak rubbery feeling I did not like. I squeezed one cheek, then the other, back and forth until the tears ran out of her eyes as if I had pulled them out. "Stop crying," I said, but although she habitually followed me around, she did not obey. Her eyes dripped, her nose dripped. She wiped her eyes with her papery fingers. The skin on her hands and arms seemed powdery dry, like tracing paper, onion paper. I hated her fingers. I could snap them like breadsticks. I pushed her hands down. "Say hi," I said. "Hi, like that. Say your name. Go ahead. Say it. Or are you stupid? You're so stupid you don't know your own name. Is that it? When I say, 'What's your name?' you just blurt it out, okay? What's your name?" Last year, the whole class had laughed at a boy who couldn't fill out a form because he didn't know his father's name. The teacher sighed, exasperated, and was very sarcastic. "Don't you notice things? What does your mother call him?" she said. The class laughed at how dumb he was not to notice things. "She calls him father of me," he said. Even we laughed, although we knew that his mother did not call his father by name and a son does not know his father's name. We laughed and were relieved that our parents had had the foresight to tell us some names we could give the teachers. "If you're not stupid," I said to the quiet girl, "what's your name?" She shook her head and some hair caught in the tears. Wet black hair stuck to the side of the pink and white face. I reached up. She was taller than I, and took a strand of her hair. I pulled it. "Well then, let's honk your hair," I said. "Honk, honk." Then I pulled the other side. Honk, a long pull. Honk, a longer pull. I could see her little white ears, like white cutworms, curled underneath the hair. "Talk!" I yelled into each cutworm. I looked right at her. "I know you talk," I said. "I've heard you." Her eyebrows flew up. Something in those black eyes was startled, and I pursued it. "I was walking past your house when you didn't know I was there. I heard you yell in English and in Chinese. You weren't just talking, you were shouting. I heard you shout. You were saying, 'Where are you?' Say that again. Go ahead, just the way you did at home." I yanked harder on the hair, but steadily, not jerking. I did not want to pull it out. But go ahead, say, "Where are you?" Say it loud enough for your sister to come. Call her. Make her come help you. Call her name. I'll stop if she comes. So call. Go ahead. She shook her head, her mouth curved down, crying. I could see her tiny white teeth, baby teeth. I wanted to grow big, strong yellow teeth. "You do have a tongue," I said, "so use it." I pulled the hair at her temples, pulled the tears out of her eyes. "Say ow," I said. "Just ow. Say. Let go." "Go ahead, say it. I'll honk you again if you don't say. Let me alone. Say, 'Leave me alone,' and I'll let you go. I will. I'll let you go if you say it. You can stop this any time you want to, you know. All you have to do is tell me to stop. Just say stop. You're just asking for it, aren't you? You're just asking for another honk. Well then, I'll have to give you another honk. Say stop." But she didn't. I had to pull again and again. Sounds did come out of her mouth, sobs, chokes, noises that were almost words. Snot ran out of her nose. She tried to wipe it on her hands, but there was too much of it. She used her sleeve. "You're disgusting," I told her. "Look at you, snot streaming down your nose, and you won't say a word to stop it. You're such a nothing." I moved behind her and pulled the hair growing out of her weak neck. I let go. I stood silent for a long time. Then I screamed, "Talk!" I would scare the words out of her. If she had little bound feet, the toes twisted under the balls, I would have jumped up and landed on them, crunch, stomped on them with my iron shoes. She cried hard, sobbing aloud. "Cry, Mama," I said. "Come on, cry, Mama. Say stop it." I put my finger on her pointed chin. "I don't like you. I don't like the weak little toots you make on your flute. Wheeze, wheeze. I don't like the way you don't swing at the ball. I don't like the way you're the last one chosen. I don't like the way you can't make a fist for tetherball. Why don't you make a fist? Come on, get tough. Come on, throw fists." I pushed at her long hands. They swung limply at her sides. Her fingers were so long, I thought maybe they had an extra joint. They couldn't possibly make fists like other people's. "Make a fist," I said. "Come on. Just fold those fingers up. Fingers on the inside, thumbs on the outside. Say nothing. Say something. Honk me back. You're so tall and you let me pick on you. Would you like a hanky? I can't get you one with embroidery on it or crocheting along the edges, but I'll get you some toilet paper if you tell me to. Go ahead, ask me. I'll get it for you if you ask." She did not stop crying. "Why don't you scream help?" I suggested. "Say help. Go ahead." She cried on. Okay. Don't talk. Just scream and I'll let you go. Won't that feel good? Go ahead, like this." I screamed not too loudly. My voice hit the tile and rang it, as if I had thrown a rock at it. The stalls opened wider and the toilets wider and darker. Shadows leaned at angles I had not seen before. I was very late. Maybe a janitor had locked me in with this girl for the night. Her black eyes blinked and stared, blinked and stared. I felt dizzy from hunger. We had been in this laboratory together forever. My mother would call the police again if I didn't bring my sister home soon. "I'll let you go if you just say one word," I said. "You can even say a or the, and I'll let you go. Come on, please." She didn't shake her head any more, only cried steadily, so much water coming out of her. I could see the two duct holes where the tears welled out, quarts of tears but no words. I grabbed her by the shoulder. I could feel bones. The light was coming in queerly through the frosted glass with the chicken wire embedded in it. Her crying was like an animal's, a seal's, and it echoed around the basement. "Do you want to stay here all night?" I asked. "Your mother is wondering what happened to her baby. You wouldn't want to have her mad at you. You'd better say something." I shook her shoulder. I pulled her hair again. I squeezed her face. "Come on, talk. Talk." She didn't seem to feel it any more when I pulled her hair. "There's nobody here but you and me. This isn't a classroom or a playground or a crowd. I'm just one person. You can talk in front of one person. Don't make me pull harder and harder until you talk." But her hair seemed to stretch. She did not say a word. "I'm going to pull harder. Don't make Don't make me pull any more or your hair will come out and you're going to be bald. Do you want to be bald? You don't want to be bald, do you? Far away, coming from the edge of town, I heard whistles blow. The canary was chanting shifts, letting out the afternoon people, and still we were here at school. It was a sad sound. Work done. The air was lonelier after the sound died. Why won't you talk? I started to cry. What if I couldn't stop and everyone would want to know what happened? Now look what you've done, I scolded. You're going to pay for this. I want to know why, and you're going to tell me why. You don't see I'm trying to help you out, do you? Do you want to be like this? Dumb. Do you know what dumb means your whole life? Don't you ever want to be a cheerleader or a pompon girl? What are you going to do for a living? Yeah, you're going to have to work because you can't be a housewife. Somebody has to marry you before you can be a housewife, and you are a plant. Do you know that? That's all you are if you don't talk. If you don't talk, you can't have a personality. You'll have no personality and no hair. You've got to let people know you have a personality and a brain. You think somebody is going to take care of you all your stupid life? You think you'll always have your big sister? You think somebody's going to marry you? Is that it? Well, you're not the type that gets dates, let alone gets married. Nobody's going to notice you, and you have to talk for interviews. Speak right up in front of the boss. Don't you know that? You're so dumb. Why do I waste my time on you? Sniffling and snorting, I couldn't stop crying and talking at the same time. I kept wiping my nose on my arm, my sweater lost somewhere, probably not worn because my mother said to wear a sweater. It seemed as if I had spent my life in that basement doing the worst thing I had yet done to another person. I'm doing this for your own good, I said. Don't you dare tell anyone I've been bad to you. Talk. Please talk. I was getting dizzy from the air I was gulping. Her sobs and my sobs were bouncing wildly off the tile, sometimes together, sometimes alternating. I don't understand why you won't say just one word, I cried, clenching my teeth. My knees were shaking, and I hung on to her hair to stand up. Another time I'd stayed too late. I had to walk around two Negro kids who were bonking each other's head on the concrete. I went back later to see if the concrete had cracks in it. Look, I'll give you something if you talk. I'll give you my pencil box. I'll buy you some candy, okay? What do you want? Tell me. Just say it, and I'll give it to you. Just say yes, or okay, or Baby Ruth. But she didn't want anything. I had stopped pinching her cheek because I did not like the feel of her skin. I would go crazy if it came away in my hands. I skinned her, I would have to confess. Suddenly, I heard footsteps hurrying through the basement, and her sister ran into the laboratory calling her name. Oh, there you are, I said. We've been waiting for you. I was only trying to teach her to talk. She wouldn't cooperate, though. Her sister went into one of the stalls and got handfuls of toilet paper and wiped her off. Then we found my sister, and we walked home together. Your family really ought to force her to speak, I advised all the way home. You mustn't pamper her. The world is sometimes just, and I spent the next 18 months sick in bed with a mysterious illness. There was no pain and no symptoms, though the middle line in my left palm broke in two. Instead of starting junior high school, I lived like the Victorian recluses I read about. I had a rented hospital bed in the living room where I watched soap operas on TV, and my family cranked me up and down. I saw no one but my family, who took good care of me. I could have no visitors, no other relatives, no villagers. My bed was against the west window, and I watched the seasons change the peach tree. I had a bell to ring for help. I used a bedpan. It was the best year and a half of my life. Nothing happened. But one day my mother, the doctor, said, "You're ready to get up today. It's time to get up and go to school." I walked about outside to get my legs working, leaning on a staff I cut from the peach tree. The sky and trees, the sun were immense, no longer framed by a window, no longer grayed with a fly screen. I sat down on the sidewalk in amazement, the night, the stars. But at school I had to figure out again how to talk. I met again the poor girl I had tormented. She had not changed. She wore the same clothes, haircut and manner as when we were in elementary school. No makeup on the pink and white face, while the other Asian girls were starting to tape their eyelids. She continued to be able to read aloud, but there was hardly any reading aloud anymore, less and less as we got into high school. I was wrong about nobody taking care of her. Her sister became a clerk typist and stayed unmarried. They lived with their mother and father. She did not have to leave the house except to go to the movies. She was supported. She was protected by her family, as they would normally have done in China, if they could have afforded it, not sent off to school with strangers, ghosts, boys. We have so many secrets to hold in. Our sixth-grade teacher, who liked to explain things to children, let us read our files. My record shows that I flunked kindergarten and in first grade had no IQ, a 0 IQ. I did remember the first grade teacher calling out during a test while students marked X's on a girl or a boy or a dog, which I covered with black. First grade was when I discovered eye control. With my seeing, I could shrink the teacher down to a height of 1 inch, gesticulating and mouthing on the horizon. I lost this power in sixth grade for lack of practice. The teacher, a generous man. Look at your family's old addresses and think about how you've moved, he said. I looked at my parents' aliases and their birthdays, which variants I knew. But when I saw father's occupations, I exclaimed, "Hey, he wasn't a farmer, he had been a gambler." My throat cut off the word. Silence in front of the most understanding teacher. There were secrets never to be said in front of the ghosts, immigration secrets whose telling could get us sent back to China. Sometimes I hated the ghosts for not letting us talk. Sometimes I hated the secrecy of the Chinese. "Don't tell," said my parents, though we couldn't tell if we wanted to because we didn't know. Are there really secret trials with our own judges and penalties? Are there really flags in Chinatown signaling what stowaways have arrived in San Francisco Bay, their names, and which ships they came on? Mother, I have heard some kids say there are flags like that, are there? What colors are they? Which buildings do they fly from? No, there aren't any flags like that. They're just talking story. You're always believing talk story. I won't tell anybody, Mother, I promise. Which buildings are the flags on? Who flies them? The benevolent associations? I don't know. Maybe the San Francisco villagers do that. Our villagers don't do that. What do our villagers do? They would not tell us children because we had been born among ghosts, were taught by ghosts, and were ourselves ghost-like. They called us a kind of ghost. Ghosts are noisy and full of air. They talk during meals. They talk about anything. Do we send up signal kites? That would be a good idea, huh? We could fly them from the school balcony. Instead of cheaply stringing dragonflies by the tail, we could fly expensive kites, the sky splendid in Chinese colors, distracting ghost eyes while the new people sneak in. Don't tell. Never tell. Occasionally, the rumor went about that the United States immigration authorities had set up headquarters in the San Francisco or Sacramento Chinatown to urge wetbacks and stowaways, anybody here on fake papers, to come to the city and get their files straightened out. The immigrants discussed whether or not to turn themselves in. We might as well, somebody would say. Then we'd have our citizenship for real. Don't be fooled. Don't be a fool, somebody else would say. It's a trap. You go in there saying you want to straighten out your papers. They'll deport you. No, they won't. They're promising that nobody is going to go to jail or get deported. They'll give you citizenship as a reward for turning yourself in for your honesty. Don't you believe it? So-and-so trusted them and he was deported. They deported his children too. Where can they send us now? Hong Kong? Taiwan? I've never been to Hong Kong or Taiwan. The Big Six? Where? We don't belong anywhere since the revolution. The old China had disappeared while we've been away. Don't tell, advised my parents. Don't go to San Francisco until they leave. Lie to Americans. Tell them you were born during the San Francisco earthquake. Tell them your birth certificate and your parents were burned up in the fire. Don't report crimes. Tell them we have no crimes and no poverty. Give a new name every time you get arrested. The ghosts won't recognize you. Pay the new immigrants 25 cents an hour and say we have no unemployment. And of course tell them we're against communism. Ghosts have no memory anyway and poor eyesight, and the Han people won't be pinned down. Even the good things are unspeakable, so how could I ask about deformities? From the configurations of food my mother set out, we kids had to infer the holidays. She did not whip us up the holiday anticipation or explain. You only remembered that perhaps a year ago you had eaten monk's food, or that there was meat and it was a meat holiday, or you had eaten mooncakes or long noodles for long life, which is a pun. In front of the whole chicken with its slit throat toward the ceiling, she'd lay out just so many pairs of chopsticks alternating with wine cups, which were not for us because they were a different number from the number in our family, and they set too close together for us to sit at. To sit at one of those place settings, a being would have to be about 2 inches wide, a tall wisp of an invisibility. Mother would pour Seagram's 7 into the cups and after a while pour it back into the bottle, never explaining. How can Chinese keep any traditions at all? They don't even make you pay attention, slipping in a ceremony and clearing the table before the children notice specialness. The adults get mad, evasive, and shut you up if you ask. You get no warning that you shouldn't wear a white ribbon in your hair until they hit you, and give you the sideways glare for the rest of the day. They hit you if you wave brooms around, or drop chopsticks, or drum them. They hit you if you wash your hair on certain days, or tap somebody with a ruler, or step over a brother, whether it's during your menses or not. You figure out what you got hit for and don't do it again if you figured correctly. But I think that if you don't figure it out, it's all right. Then you can grow up bothered by neither ghosts nor deities. Gods you avoid won't hurt you. I don't see how they kept up a continuous culture for 5,000 years. Maybe they didn't. Maybe everyone makes it up as they go along. If we had to depend on being told, we have no religion, no babies, no menstruation. Sex, of course, unspeakable. No death. I thought talking and not talking made the difference between sanity and insanity. Insane people were the ones who couldn't explain themselves. There were many crazy girls and women. Perhaps the sane people stayed in China to build the new sane society. Or perhaps our little village had become odd in its isolation. No other Chinese, neither the ones in Sacramento nor the ones in San Francisco, not Hawaii, speak like us. Within a few blocks of our house were half a dozen crazy women and girls, all belonging to village families. There was the woman next door who was chatty one moment, inviting us children to our first Sky movie, and shut up the next. Then we would see silver heat rise from her body. It solidified before our eyes. She made us afraid, though she said nothing, did nothing. Her husband had to drive home fast in the middle of the show. He threw the loudspeaker out the window. She sat like stone in the front seat. He had to open the door for her and help her out. She slammed the door. After they went inside, we could hear doors slamming throughout their house. They did not have children, so it was not slammed. It was not children slamming doors. The next day she disappeared, and people would say she had been taken to Napa or Gnu. When a woman disappeared or reappeared after an absence, people whispered Napa and knew. She had been locked up before. Her husband rented out the house and also went away. The last time we had left town, he had been single. He had gone back to China, where he had brought her and married her. Now, while she was locked up in the asylum, he went, people said, to the Midwest. A year or two passed. He returned to Napa to drive her home. As a present, he had brought with him from the Midwest a child, half Chinese and half white. People said it was his illegitimate son. She was very happy to have a son to raise in her old age. Although I saw that the boy hit her to get candy and toys, she was the one who died happy, sitting on the steps after cooking dinner. There was Crazy Mary, whose family were Christian converts. Her mother and father had come to the Gold Mountain, leaving Mary, a toddler, in China. By the time they made enough money to send for her, having replaced the horse and vegetable wagon with a truck, she was almost 20 and crazy. Her parents often said, "We thought she'd be grown, but young enough to learn Chinese and translate for us." Their other children who were born in the U.S. were normal and could translate. I was glad that I was born 9 months after my mother emigrated. Crazy Mary was a large girl and had a big black mole on her face, which is a sign of fortune. The black mole pulls you forward with its power. A mole at the back of the head pulls you back. She seemed cheerful, but pointed at things that were not there. I disliked looking at her. You never knew what you were going to see, what rictus would shape her face, or what you would hear, growls, laughs. Her head hung like a bull's, and her eyes peeked at you out of her hair. Her face was a white blur because she was indoors so much, and also because I tried not to look at her directly. She often had rice on her face and in her hair. Her mother cut her hair neatly around her ears, stubble at the back of her neck. She wore pajamas, a rough brown sweater buttoned crooked, and a big apron, not a work apron but a bib. She wore slippers and you could see her thick ankles naked, her naked heels and tendons. When you went to her house, you had to keep alert because you didn't want her to come at you from around a corner, her hands loose. She would lurch out of dark corners. Houses with crazy girls have locked rooms and drawn curtains. A smell came from her which would not have been unpleasant had it belonged to someone else. The house smelled of her, camphoraceous. Maybe they tied camphor on her pulse to cure her. Our mother used to tie dried prunes stuffed with camphor to our wrists. We got very embarrassed at school when the rags came loose and their contents fell out in clumps and grains. Crazy Mary did not improve, and so she too was locked up in the crazy house. She was never released. Her family said she liked it there. There was a slough where our mother took us to pick orange berries. We carried them home in pots and bags to cook in an egg soup. It was not a wild slough, and although tules, cattails, and foxtails still grew, also dill and yellow chamomile, fat and fuzzy as bees. People had been known to have followed the hobo paths and parted the tall stalks to find dead bodies, hobos, Chinese suicides, children, red-winged blackbirds whose shoulders were the same color as the berries, perched on a wood bridge, really a train trestle. When a train heaved across it, the black steam engine swelled into bursting, like the boiler at the laundry. The birds flew up like Halloween. We were not the only people who picked in the slough. A witch woman also went there. One of my brothers named her Pia Na, which does not have a meaning. Of all the crazy ladies, she was the one who was the village idiot, the public one. When our mother was with us, she would chase the witch woman away. We'd stand beside and behind our mother, who would say to her, "Leave us alone now," or "Good morning," or Pia Na would go away. But when we were by ourselves, she chased us. "Pia Na!" we'd scream. We'd run, terrified, along the hobo paths, over the trestle, and through the streets. Kids said she was a witch capable of witch deeds, unspeakable boilings and tearings apart and transformations if she caught us. She'll touch you on the shoulder and you'll not be you any more. You'd be a piece of glass winking and blinking to people on the sidewalk. She came riding to the slough with a broom between her legs, and she had powdered one cheek red and one white. Her hair stood up and out to the sides in dry masses, black even though she was old. She wore a pointed hat and layers of capes, shawls, sweaters buttoned at the throat like capes, the sleeves flying behind like sausage skins. She came to the slough not to harvest the useful herbs and berries the way we did, but to collect armfuls of cattails and tall grasses and tuber flowers. Sometimes she carried her broomstick hoarse like a staff. In the fall she would be such a sight in the fall. She ran faster than a swallow, her cattails popping seed, white seed puffs blowing after her, clouds of fairies dancing over her head.